Okay, let's face it, watch collecting is supposed to be fun, but inevitably we've all made a few embarrassing mistakes along the way. Whether you're just dipping your toes into horology or you've got enough watches to require their own insurance policy, today we're talking about common pitfalls you need to avoid, from beginner blunders to expert slip-ups. Some of these things, and most of these things, I either have done or continue to do to this day. The thing you need to do is consider wearing it every day. You move your arms actually quite a bit throughout the day. When I'm in a jewelry store, a lot of times if I'm going to put something on, I'll rotate the watch like this and I'll see how much the weight shifts on my wrist. Because without that, if you just hold it like this and you look at it in the jewelry store, all that weight is balanced perfectly. And that's not indicative of how it's actually going to feel with you wearing it at your side. There's a lot more rotational torque movement on the watch. One of the things I dislike most about a watch is when it bobbles or the weight shifts substantially, especially forward back on my wrist, because that's when you start getting that crown feeling digging into your hand or your wrist here. So when you try it on, bobble the wrist a little bit, check your wrist size, get a good idea for what you like to wear, and then also just try things on. Always wear it first before buying. Being overly involved in the movement of the watch. Now I say this just because the movement is often the greatest area of magic and also the greatest area of marketing speak for a watch company. The movement that's in this Seiko, for example, is marginally different than a movement that I'm going to find in a Rolex Submariner, an H. Moser. And when I say marginally different, I mean from a functionality standpoint, not from a finishing standpoint. And people will spend more money for better finishing, and I don't blame them for that. But people tend to overcomplicate and over-obsess, and I have done this as well, over-obsess about the movement in a watch being a particular caliber from a particular country, or making sure that it has, a coaxial escapement or a 70-hour power reserve. And a lot of these are creature comforts. Whether they're price multipliers, from $200 all the way up to $10,000, I don't think that movement truly is a price multiplier. It's purely used, I think, for most of us as a justifier. We spent that much money. We feel like we spent a lot of money. We start to rationalize in our mind why we spent that much, and we list out specs, when the real reason we bought the watch is because we like how it looks. And so if you just make it plain and simple, I like how it looks, that's why I bought it, then I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Now, I think having a good movement in there to know that it's reliable over a long term is helpful, but I don't know that it's worth the price multiples that you typically get into in this luxury game. Things are not worth exactly what they are as the price goes up. You have diminishing marginal returns. I'm actually going to do a video, if I haven't already released it, on luxury watches and their price points. So look up above if I've already made that, and how a luxury watch gets to its final retail price. Breaking it down so that you understand why it is priced the way that it is. A lot of it has to do with how a watch goes to market. For example, Christopher Ward sells direct to consumer. Since they sell direct to consumer, they can price it about half of what you're going to find from a brand like Tudor that's selling a similar watch. Or sometimes even less, because a lot of that has to do with the fact that they get all that margin and they don't have the boutique that they have to sponsor at the same time. And so that extra margin means they can price them very differently. So that is a whole conversation that I have in a different video. But in general, luxury watches are not known for, one-to-one mechanical input to price. It's like cars. Some cars are $20,000 and some cars are $100,000, and a lot of the difference between the two are creature comforts. The next is being overly concerned with polishing of watches. I see this all the time. People read what they're fed typically from like Hodinkee or any of these vintage watch collectors. And most of these guys have plenty of money. Or if they don't have plenty of money, they're spending it in irrationally terrible ways. If I had, $50 million and I was going out and buying watches, then sure, I have the luxury to go out and find new old stock. I'll focus on rarity, and I'll try and make sure that my collection is this fantastic, eclectic group of well-preserved watches, like a museum, basically. Now, the difference is I am not one of those people. I work in a warehouse. I'm doing things all the time, wearing my watch. This is a tool for me. It's something that tells the time. It's also a source of pride and enjoyment for me as well. So it's both. It's not just simply a tool. I do like wearing something nice. It does make me feel good about what I'm wearing. I like the design. And yes, it makes me feel good about myself at the same time. I'm wearing something that's nice. It makes me feel nice, look good, feel good. And I think that that is the case with the watch. So when it comes to polishing, if I have a new watch, I'm not planning to sell it. Maybe my kid eventually will plan to sell it. But in the meantime, if I service something, it's nice for me to have it feel like it did 5, 6, 7 years ago, where it gets polished, it comes back to me, it looks like a brand new watch. I think that that is a fun moment. And I'll probably end up putting new scratches in it. Having the value and making sure the watch keeps its same value at being unpolished, I think is a bit silly, in my opinion. Some people decide that that's how they want to spend their money. They only want unpolished things. They never polish their watches. Great, I don't care. Do whatever you want to do. But these watches, these modern watches, are built in such high volume that whether or not you polish your watch makes probably no difference to the overall price point, because they're all not going to carry the same sort of value these vintage watches have. You have 5,000 vintage watches that were made in a year versus today it's 100,000 of the same watch. You know, you simply, math-wise, until you're 150 years from now, are probably not going to get down to the same 5,000 to make it just as valuable. Sure, there's an argument to be made that eventually it'll be the same value, but that value only matters if you're going to sell it. I don't plan on selling my watches. So I polish them when I get them serviced. It's nice for me. It's fun to get it back, fun to make it look nice and brand new. That means nothing to me. There's nothing wrong if that's something you want to do. If you don't want to polish them, fine, that's up to you as well. The other thing I'd add to that is you can laser weld on material and then either CNC it or shave it back down. And in theory, a watch could be restored to exactly what it looked like once upon a time. And I think having owned a laser welder in our warehouse and used one myself, the ease in which there is to use that machine and the fact that you can hook it up to a robot with no problem, I think means that this is only going to be more and more common, that people laser weld on material and then throw it into a CNC to CNC it to the exact same shape it was once upon a time, remill it basically and refinish it, and you got a brand new watch. And I don't see why that isn't a fantastic thing. You could have all these vintage watches and current modern watches and neo-vintage watches worn, polished, and then refurbished into what they look like originally. I think that's fantastic. So don't worry too much about polishing watches if you're someone that likes to do it. The next one would be getting overly involved in accessories or knickknacks. So what I mean by that is if you're going to be buying watch boxes, or you're going to be buying spring bar tools or spring bars or straps, or any of the tools you need like screwdrivers and whatnot, you can buy a base level of what you need and you don't necessarily need to buy everything out there. Watch winders are a great point in that. I think watch winders are silly and unnecessary. They're convenience tools so that you don't have to wind it again, but they mean that the watch is always running. So like if you have 1,000 days of a watch running before it needs a service, the fact that it's on the winder means every day, every calendar day counts as a day of wear for the watch. Versus if you let it die and then pick it back up. Like I wear this every 2 weeks, I let it die, I pick it back up, I let it die, I pick it back up. 1,000 days of that, of wear, is way longer than if it was on a watch winder. And while I, yes, have to start it up and get it running and then set the time and date and everything, it's no big deal. And I think that that's actually a fun thing for me. I do it with all my watches. So I have never used a watch winder. I'm not going to use a watch winder. So don't get overly involved in the accessories and things that you think you might need. Get the watches, get a basic, 1.6 mil, 1.4, 1.2, and 1 mil screwdriver. And that should be a pretty good basic start because most things are screw links, maybe a pin and collar adjustment so that you can adjust use in your friends' bracelets. But you don't need much else outside of that. Maybe a watch box. The next one would be if you're going to get into tools because you are going to start buying accessories, get the nice ones. Don't buy the cheap ones. I say that with my own regret in mind here. While yes, you think you get a great deal buying this or that, for $20 or for $30, it never ever works. So if you really think you're actually going to need that tool, here's a good example. This is a bezel remover. I used this bezel on my Explorer 2 at one point to try and refurbish the external bezel. And in order to remove that, it was so tightly fit that I tried to use a different bezel remover, and it was not good on the bezel itself because The teeth weren't at the right angle or at the right sharpness, and I couldn't get consistent pressure. This is a Horatech. This thing right here costs like $300. It seems ridiculous for this tool. That is the price of luxury watch tools. They're just expensive. But these have replaceable blades and it works like a charm. Having the right tool for the job is worth it. It's like that in woodworking. It's like that in everything. Just buy a nice tool. Don't buy the cheaper tools. You will regret it because you'll screw up your watch. Again, from experience. There are exceptions to that. There are caseback removal tools that are full-size caseback removal tools with the wheel on top. You don't necessarily need to have the best, but for the die, like if you're gonna remove a Rolex caseback and you wanna buy the die, get the nice die. Because again, any slipping is gonna cause significant wear. And if you don't like wear or you don't like polishing your watches, you're definitely gonna wanna have the nice tool. The next one is impulse buying on eBay. This is something I am guilty of. I think everyone here is guilty of, getting caught up in a bidding war. The last 5 minutes where everyone's changing their price really quickly. Don't get overly involved in the eBay world, especially if you're new to it. eBay can be a great resource to find things that you couldn't find anywhere else. And typically you can find them at a decent price point. On the downside, you're gonna find sellers who are doing no returns and are often gonna be selling something as is. And you think you can see everything in the pictures. I hate to break it to you, you can't see everything. Sure, every so often, and I have done this myself, you'll buy something, it'll be a decent deal, you won't mind, and you kind of move on. Or you have someone that does like that 10% discount that they throw at you. And so then you end up buying the watch. A lot of times, if you're buying it without fully vetting that you want that specific watch in your mind and or figuring out from the reseller exactly what the service history is, you could be buying something that costs you money. I bought a Navitimer, and when I received it, it had no return policy with the vendor. I received it, I started using it, everything seemed fine. About a month later, it needed a service. Like, it was very obvious that it needed a service, and so I had to get it serviced. That wasn't fun for chronograph. I thought I had saved $400 or $500, and I ended up spending $800 to get it serviced. So it cost me more money in the end. So that's definitely something I would highly recommend. Buy it from someone where you can return it if it doesn't wear right on your wrist. I've had that problem also, where I get it, I put it on, I don't really like how it wears, but I bought it from someone who did no returns. I'm stuck with the watch until I end up reselling it, and typically I resell it at a loss. Even when you think you're finding a good deal, you probably aren't finding a good deal. Check out Watch Recon. That gives you some good insights as to what the actual buying price is. Looking at sold on eBay isn't always 100% correct. And then the other aspect to that would be Watch Charts is great for average pricing, but what you really need to look at if you're on Watch Charts is the bubbles that show sold, not the ones that show listed. Because the problem with Watch Charts I have found is they'll give you this chart and this spread, and you'll see all these bubbles that say listed, and they're on the higher end, and all these bubbles that say sold on the lower end. Those sold ones are what the actual price is, not the line they put in the middle saying it's this price, because there's lists that are high and solds that are low. If they sell at that price that's lower, that is the sale price, not the in-between of the list and the sold. So that always bothered me recently on Watch Charts when I started really paying attention, and I think you should definitely know that if you're using that as an indicator of whether or not you're buying something at a decent price. This is something I think people get into when they start really getting into watches, and that is overly complicating your brain with limited edition or exclusivity and scarcity. While everyone loves exclusivity and scarcity, I think the more money you have and the bigger your watch collection gets, the more you want to be unique, the more you want to show up at a watch event with something no one else has. I get it. That's why I bought the Benzinger, the Gap 1, which I liked, and sold at a significant loss. Or if you buy something like the vintage Speedmaster that I have. Again, I think that pull to feel unique in this hobby is something that people eventually get to, especially if they watch multiple videos. So if you're out there looking at limited editions and whatnot, you don't need a limited edition watch. It's not like a requirement within your collection. You don't have to have one. But if you're interested in that stuff, obviously go for it. But don't get overly sucked in. Just because it's limited doesn't mean it's going to hold perfect value at the same time. It just means it's a limited run. Typically that means it's because it's pretty niche and most people aren't going to want it for a long period of time. Or it means that they're trying to drive sales really quickly, and so they have a limited edition, and that scarcity that's built into that product is going to force sales a little bit more. And so it works from an economic standpoint, but maybe not a consumer standpoint. One of my least favorite has to be this one, and that is brand snobbery. And it works up and down the chain. You have people that are Seiko diehards or Timex diehards or San Martin diehards that hate anything that's over $1,000. It's ridiculous that you would spend $5, $6, $7, $10,000 on a watch. Some people also spend $500,000 on a watch. It is purely just a measure of your disposable income and enjoyment and how much you have to match those two. You know, if you have a disposable income of $1 million, you're probably not going to get the same enjoyment out of a $1,000 watch from a purchasing experience because it won't be as thrilling, almost like gambling. It won't be as thrilling as buying something that's $200,000, right? Whereas if you have a disposable income of, say, $200 a month, then you have to scrape together for a little while to buy something. And that's a totally different level of enjoyment when you end up buying something that's $500 because that represents a huge portion of your disposable income. I've talked about this before. What I don't like is people disliking people for buying expensive watches and people who dislike people who buy less expensive watches. Who cares? If you buy a watch brand because you like it, great, that's up to you. But these brands aren't like your college football team. They don't care if you like their brand. They don't love you. They're just a brand. They want to sell you a watch. They want you to buy it. They want you to buy the next one. Then they want you to buy the next one. But you don't have a personal connection typically with these brands. Independents, maybe you have an independent relationship with them, but they're also like salesmen. You think you have a connection with them, but they're just selling you. That's just part of sales. Like you make a connection with someone, yeah, you get to know them a little bit, but your goal is to sell them a watch, not to be their best friend. And I think that that's definitely something you should consider. Your brand shouldn't be your identity. I like brands up and down the list. I have expensive watches. I've bought $13,000 independent brand watches. I've bought recently $100, I have a $200 Timex right over there, which I'm really excited to unbox and review soon. If I haven't already uploaded that review, if I have, I'll link it up above. I'm super excited to unbox that because I think that's a fantastic looking watch for the price point and has some unique features that I think are sweet. Micro brands at the same time, Christopher Ward here, or this Seiko, or yeah, I have Rolex or Omega or vintage Omega. Who cares? A watch is a watch. If you like the design, then you should buy it. Who cares about the movement that much? As long as it wears good, looks good, and makes you feel good, you're done. The brand on the dial is just icing on the cake if that is important to you. I don't think you should overlook brand. Brand is something that definitely is influencing me every so often. I buy a Timex, sure, but that's because I think Timex is a good brand. You know, I don't have a Daniel Wellington, for example, because I don't relate how I see myself with how I think the Daniel Wellington typical consumer sees themselves. Doesn't mean I dislike them. I don't think the watches are crap. A little overpriced, but they're not crap. The next one would be the one I talk about all the time, and that is value in watches. I think you should always consider when you buy something to lose 10 to 20%. I'll make this brief. I've talked about it a million times. Your watch is not an investment. It is a fixed asset, yes. You can sell it because it is a store of value, but that value is very, very up and down. Brand perception has a lot to do with what a value looks like. In 10 years, if Rolex is not the top dog, then the watches from Rolex, even the Submariner, are not going to be worth the same money than they're worth right now. You know, if Rolex goes defunct, goes bankrupt, and falls apart, then the watch is going to be worth a lot less money, at least until it bounces back up because now it's rare again. Same as the rise up. You know, Universal Genève is getting recreated by Breitling. Now that it's getting recreated, it's probably going to be more expensive on the vintage market in the short term, and that's just because people are paying attention to it right now. Public perception matters a lot from that standpoint. So I do think you should consider that, yes, it is a fixed asset. Yes, it is some store of value. It is not the perfect store of value. You will likely lose 10 to 20 to 30% on most of the watches you buy. I typically expect to lose a quarter of what I purchased it for. If I buy something for $5,000 and I decide I want to sell it, I'm going to lose $1,250 almost immediately off the top, if not more. You buy a Tudor, people think that they carry their value. 3 years later, they do not carry their value. You're going to lose a lot of money, especially if you sell it back to a jeweler who needs to make 30% on that watch, 20 to 30% on that watch. You're just not going to get the money back out of it. So definitely always know your watch is a fixed asset. but it is not a perfect store of value. And so you should always try and keep cash or investments that are different than watches. Don't be like me in the early days and put a lot of your money into these things right here. The next one is overcomplicating your collecting philosophy by building out this idea of what you should be having. A dive watch, a field watch, a pilot's watch, a chronograph, a dress watch. You build out this whole collection in your mind of what you think you should be having, or you want to be a Speedmaster person, you specialize on that. And that's great if that works for you. I have written countless lists where I say, I've got this, 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 and this, and I check them off. And I almost use it as a way to justify why I have 5 different watches that look somewhat similar to one another. Because I'll say like, oh, well, that's my everyday when I need to, or I'll say that one's my, really exciting, or that's my unique piece. And all it is just a way to structure it to excuse why you have what you have. The same can be true for why you have a dress, a field, a dive. Like a field and a dive watch are really just everyday watches. You don't have to have both in your collection unless you actually are a diver. And as someone who recreationally dives, like I don't need a dive watch. I need a dive computer. And I don't even own one of those. I rent them. So that's the silly part. I don't need that dive watch. It's just an excuse. Same with a traveler's watch, a GMT watch. I got caught up in, for a period of time, I needed to have a GMT watch. I've worn a GMT watch for the purpose of changing time zones as I travel 3 times, maybe in the last 4 years, or 3 years that I've owned it. So unless you're someone that travels a lot and that's important to you, just know a GMT, a traveler style watch, a diver watch, they're all basically the same. You don't have to overcomplicate it. Wear what you like to wear, buy what you like to buy, but you don't need a checklist of checking off everything that you need in your collection. And you certainly don't need to have a checklist on specific watches. You don't need a Submariner, you don't need a Speedmaster to have a complete collection. I've heard people say that. That's silly. Just buy what you like. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't build out a whole list of what you need and why you need it. You're just using it to make a reason why you own the watch. Just own it because you like it and make it as simple as that. The last one is the biggest one in my opinion, and that is overly comparing your collection to someone else's. Your collection is your collection. It has your stories. It has the things you bought, why you bought them, when you liked them, all that stuff. You don't have to have the same watches as someone else. I talked about this in the last video. You shouldn't look at your collection and say, well, I don't have a $5,000 watch, or I don't have an Omega, or I don't have a Tudor, or I don't have a Submariner, I don't have a Rolex. So therefore, I don't have a good collection. That's silly. And the weird thing is, the higher you go up in the price tier, the watches in your collection, that feeling doesn't go away. You just say, well, I don't have an H. Moser. I don't have a highly finished hot horology watch. I don't have a Perpetual. I don't have a Tourbillon, right? You can just keep going up. There is no end. Or I don't have a high complication JLC. I don't have a grand complication Vacheron or Patek. You can just keep going up in price point. And eventually we have to tap out because you reach the limit of how much money you actually have to put into watches. Just know that you shouldn't compare your watch to someone else's because someone always has a better collection. Someone always has a cooler, better, different watch. So those are my thoughts. That is watch collection advice, at least as far as I see it. I know I ranted on a lot of different topics, but I have a lot of thoughts on these sorts of watches. And I think it's important that you buy what you like 100% of the time. Don't buy into the hype. Don't buy them as investment vehicles. And don't overcomplicate yourself either with brand or with comparing yourself to someone else. Just buy what you like. Move on from there. Do you guys have any tips for those out there? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.